Welcome to the Cloud Communications Alliance. I'm Joe Marion, President of the Cloud Communications Alliance. I want to thank you for joining us today, this morning, this afternoon. We have people really from around the world, which is very relevant because the topic we're going to talk about today is happening all around the world. And we're fortunate enough to have Michael Pryor from Brownstein, who is a CCA member, also serves on our Government Affairs Committee. Michael spends really countless, maybe even thankless hours, working on the Government Affairs Committee. Michael, thank you for the job you're doing. You're really just a great asset to our community, and we do appreciate it. Let me turn over to you because you know the subject matter better than anybody. So, Michael Pryor, take it away. Everybody have a great webinar. I'll be here.
Great. Thank you so much, Joe. And again, welcome to everybody, and thanks for joining us today. So what we're going to do today, we're going to provide sort of an update on the sort of the latest chapter of the ongoing saga of how to stop illegal robocalls and the FCC's various efforts, and then some additional industry-led efforts. So I'm going to make a couple of quick introductions. First, I want to introduce Ronald Quirk, who's a senior managing attorney in the CommLaw Group at Marashland and Donahue, and he is head of their IoT and connected devices practices. He's been working in this industry for more than 20 years and has represented clients before the FCC and various federal and state agencies. He's going to talk about the upcoming deadline for small non-facilities VoIP providers to implement STIR/SHAKEN. And I want to thank Ronald for really being the prime mover setting up this webinar today. And then I'm going to provide sort of a high-level summary of an order that the FCC just released on Friday that imposes a lot of new obligations on U.S. gateway providers. And I'm going to try to focus my discussion on how some of those requirements will affect foreign providers. And then we're really very pleased to have Jim McEachern join us. Jim is advisor for the Alliance for Telecommunications Industry Solutions, or ATIS, and he has a tremendous amount of expertise with STIR/SHAKEN and the protocol. He's a long and distinguished career doing technical and standards-related topics in the telecommunications industry. And Jim's going to talk to us about sort of an industry-led effort for setting up a global STIR/SHAKEN framework. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Ronald. We're going to try to save some time at the end for questions, but I think we also have a chat feature if you want to just type in some questions while we're going along, and we'll try to get to those. But with that, let me turn this over to Ronald.
Okay. Thanks, Mike, for the introduction, and thanks to everyone who took the time to join us today. Oh, can we get down to slide 3 there, Karen? Okay. Well, are we out there? Can we go to slide 3? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh,
what
okay.
slide are you looking for?
Slide 3, Marashland and Donahue. Okay. Anyway, while we're waiting for the slide to come up, I'll just mention that, as Mike said, I'm the head of the IoT group at Marashland and Donahue, the CommLaw Group in Tysons, Virginia. Just a little background on the firm very briefly. Our firm has experienced attorneys who can assist clients with robocall mitigation and FCC compliance, local government and state tax issues. We're very client-centered. We don't break the bank, and our fees are about half of what you'd pay for the firms across the river in DC. And very briefly, we also have a consultancy branch called the Compliance Group, which has a state-of-the-art automated system for federal and state regulatory compliance filings. So we can prepare and file anything from FCC forms to the FCC Form 99 to state tax documents for a low monthly fee. So that's a little background on our firm. And next slide. We have a disclaimer that you should just take a look at briefly. It's a necessary disclaimer. Are we there? Okay, there we go. Just take a quick look at that. I know it's pro forma, but it is necessary. Just 10 seconds or so, and then we'll get to the agenda. Okay, there we go. This webinar will cover matters that are very critical to robocall mitigation compliance. We'll cover a brief history of robocall mitigation, and the all-important and rapidly approaching June 30th compliance deadline, how to comply with the FCC rules, and what will happen if you fail to comply. We'll also cover the neglected issue of how the tentacles of robocall mitigation enforcement have extended well beyond the FCC to the states, to the FTC, and also internationally. So next slide. Okay, so just a brief history of how we got here. In 2019, Congress gave FCC its marching orders to promulgate robocall mitigation rules to ensure that virtually all voice service providers implement the necessary safeguards in the IP portions of their network. The FCC responded with the requirement that voice service providers, we'll just refer to them as VSPs for short, implement STIR/SHAKEN in their networks. STIR/SHAKEN, we use it a lot, but a lot of people don't know that it's an acronym for Secure Telephone Identity Revisited and Signature-Based Handling of Asserted Information Using Token Standards. So we all got that? So I just say thank goodness for acronyms. In any event, in 2020, the FCC released a series of orders implementing STIR/SHAKEN rules. First deadline was June 30th, 2021, but the FCC granted a 2-year extension for small VSPs, those with 100,000 or less subscriber lines, and required them to file a placeholder robocall mitigation plan in the FCC's robocall mitigation database. Originally, small carriers were given until June 2023 to become fully STIR/SHAKEN compliant, but last December, the FCC decided to cut that extension by a year for most small VSPs. Next. Okay, so the FCC now requires that non-facilities-based VSPs become fully STIR/SHAKEN compliant by this June 30th. A non-facilities-based VSP means a small voice carrier that provides voice services to end users using connections to upstream carriers that are not affiliated with the VSP. So if your upstream carrier is any company other than one you're affiliated with, you were considered to be a non-facilities-based VSP that is required to become fully STIR/SHAKEN by June 30th. There are a number of steps that VSPs must follow to become fully STIR/SHAKEN compliant. These steps may appear to be somewhat daunting at first, but as long as enough time is allocated to follow them, the procedures are not as convoluted as they may seem. So we can go to step 1. Okay. First of all, some of you may know these steps already, so please bear with us if you've already done some of these. But it is important to go over them so that everybody we're all on the same page. So the first step is to obtain an operating company number from Neca. The process is fairly simple. It's basically an administrative application, but you'll need to provide some documents along with your application. Articles of incorporation with a state seal, interconnection or service agreement with your upstream provider, and a sample customer invoice. The reason why Neca requires these is to show proof that your company is still a legal entity, proof of service that you are providing service, and proof of customers. Neca is usually pretty quick about issuing OCNs, and most carriers opt for the regular $475 fee for 10-day service. But for those that need their OCN quicker, they charge $600 for 3-day service. And CommLaw Group is assisting many clients with these applications. So if you are interested in anyone helping you out, please let me know. So next one, step 2, is after you receive your OCN, you'll need to register with iConnective, which is the designated Secure Telephone Identity Policy Administrator, to become an authorized carrier and then obtain your token. So the first portion of the application, when you log into the iConnective portal, it's fairly simple. You'll input some administrative information, your OCN, and some additional identification information, which you'll need to write down and save. So in order to proceed with the next portion of your application, which is the token acquisition itself. So what will happen is after you file the first section, iConnective will send you an email to verify the email along with a series of questions. And most of the questions are simple, but some are rather arcane, such as the desired token expiry date. And a lot of people don't know what that means, but basically you can have your token be valid from anywhere from 1 day with daily renewals to 2 years. Most VSPs choose 2 years, but some choose 1 day with repeated renewals. The reason is that if you choose 2 years and you have a rogue employee that might be tempted to use your token and apply for stir shaken on their own, they can't do that if your token changes day to day, but they can if you have, say, a 1 or 2 year expiry date. They can use your token for their own purposes. So depending on how confident you are of your employees, I wouldn't, you can apply for 2 years and just leave it at that for the time being. Other questions are if you're working with an approved software vendor, which we'll get to in a minute, and the IP address you'll be using. And if you do work with an approved software vendor, their IP address will be the one that you will put in there. So we have step 3 next. And this one is the actual obtaining of the token. At this point, most VSPs will choose to work with an approved software vendor, and this portion of the application is where you'll need to submit your current FCC form 499 to iConnective. If you don't have a 499, and that's for those of you who don't know what it is, it's the form that all telecom carriers have to file with USAC, which is the Universal Service Administrator, every year, the 499As and the 499Qs every quarter to report your telecom revenue, which is distributed to companies for universal service purposes, and also telecom relay services for handicapped people, and NAMPA for the local number portability. So if you don't have a 499, we can assist you with that. Our compliance group does help with that, but you will have to have a 499A on file in order to obtain a token. So at this point, as I mentioned, what you will do is most people go to work with one of the approved software providers. And they're listed here. The links are on the slides, and they will assist you in completing the remainder of the iConnective application so you can obtain your token. And then because and they'll also update your network so that the software in your network so you'll be fully stir shaken compliant. Most of these companies charge $450 to $500 per month, but for atypical software systems, they could charge more because there's obviously more engineering involved. These vendors also serve as certification authorities, so you need to work at them with some point. And if you do choose to upgrade the software yourself, iConnective will work with you to test your system for compliance. And they have a guide which you can download to assist you with the process. But again, I would say more than 9/10 of VSPs do use one of these vendors because they make it a lot easier to get through the rest of the process. So then we have steps 4 and 5, which are obtaining your certificate and confirming STIR, shake, and compliant. The next steps are fairly simple. You'll work with your CA to obtain your final STIR, shake, and compliance certificate. And once you have that, you will be fully STIR, shake, and compliant. You will have met the FCC's June 30th deadline. And then the last thing that you will need to do, and this is very important, a lot of people don't think about this, you'll need to go into the FCC's Robocall mitigation database and upgrade your status to full STIR, shake, and compliant. You know, most VSPs have filed Robocall mitigation plans, and they have checked off that they're not fully STIR, shake, and compliant, that they're using the Robocall mitigation plan only to prevent robocall. So you'll have to fix that once you get your certificate. Please don't forget to do that, because the FCC will be asking, sending you emails asking why you're not fully STIR, shake, and compliant. So please be sure that you do that. If for some reason you can't meet the deadline, what you'll need to do is request an extension of time with the FCC. You will need to do that before June 30th, and I would recommend at least a week before June 30th. And please note that the only way the FCC will grant an extension of time is if you can prove, and that's with documentation, that circumstances beyond your control will require an extension. Otherwise, the FCC will not grant extensions. But the FCC did say in one of the orders that they released last year that they will entertain extensions, but they won't. The extension will not be for a long period of time either. We're talking about a 3 or 4 week extension at the most. But it's best to avoid that, and please do come into compliance with all the requirements by June 30th. But if you do need to file an extension of time, CommLaw Group can do that. I've done many so far, so be happy to assist with that if it's absolutely necessary. Okay, so the next issue is what the issues are if you don't comply with the STIR, shake, and rules. So we can go next slide. Okay. Oh, I wanted to go to the rules. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, can you go back one? I missed one. So please go back. Yeah, the compliance rules, just briefly. The rules can be found at 47 CFR 64, 6300 through 64, 6308. You'll also want to take a look at 64 1200, because that has the blocking rules and some other pertinent rules. There's 2 specific requirements to remember, and these are of the utmost importance, is that if you get a request from the industry traceback group to check on your traffic, monitor your traffic, or do a traceback request, which basically, for those of you who don't know, the traceback request is when you'll need to go back and trace the origin of a suspicious call, and that will typically be tracing it back to a number or numbers where the suspicious looking traffic is coming from, and then you'll need to report back to the industry traceback group with your findings. I would highly recommend downloading their policies and procedures manual. I have a link here, and that will spell out ITG's authority and what you need to do in the event you're contacted by them. Another important point to remember is, and I've been asked this many times, you can't recover STIR, shake, and expenses from any of your customers who are either consumers or small business customers. And as you can see, the Small Business Administration has defined a small business as one that has no more than 1,500 employees and less than 38.5 million in average revenue, annual revenue. So it's a good bet that probably most of your customers are those that you cannot recover stir shaking expenses from. So just as an aside, for those of you who do work on universal service, you can pass universal service fees onto your customers, but you can't pass stir shaking expenses onto your customers. So thank you. Thanks, Karen. And next slide, please. Yeah, here's the consequences of non-compliance. The main thing that you'll have to know is that if you're not compliant by the deadline, the FCC, or have filed a request for extension that the FCC has granted, they do authorize downstream carriers to block your calls. And typically the way this happens is that the FCC requires your downstream carriers to look at the robocall mitigation database and see if you are fully stir shaking compliant, which is another reason why it's important not to forget to do that, to upgrade your status. So please do that. And on the bottom of the page, I've listed some major fines that the FCC has imposed against robocallers themselves. 225 million is the largest fine the FCC has ever imposed. And these sanctions were imposed against the robocallers themselves, but as we'll see in just a moment, it's very possible that the FCC will impose fines against non-compliant VSPs for quote-unquote facilitating legal robocalling, which basically means being non-stir shaking compliant. So if we could go to the next slide of the other areas of robocall enforcement. So if you take a look at this slide here, you'll see that the FCC isn't the only entity that is enforcing robocall mitigation. This is a very neglected area now, but trust me, it is and will become extremely important after June 30th, especially for those who are not fully stir shaking compliant. All states' attorneys general are partnering with the FCC to establish information sharing and investigation cooperation. Note that there's 36 state attorneys general that have filed memorandums of understanding with the FCC to sort of solidify their agreement to cooperate with the FCC, but all attorneys general are working with the FCC. It's likely that every state attorney general will soon have an MOU with the FCC, so just bear in mind that there's more than the FCC that's checking this out right now. And the Federal Trade Commission and private companies, as we'll see briefly, are also actively enforcing stir shaking in their own way. So the next issue is state robocall laws, and these are minefields, trust me. As shown on the slides, I used Vermont and Michigan as examples, but if I wanted to put all of them in here, we'd never get through with this webinar. So Vermont and Michigan are pretty illustrative of typical robocall mitigation statutes. See, the Vermont prohibits knowingly routing illegal robocalls or consciously avoiding the knowledge of doing so. And that basically means that as a voice carrier, you should have mitigated illegal robocalls, or you should have known that you had to avoid to mitigate those calls. And sanctions include $10,000 per violation, and that could mean per day, and restitution to the harmed consumers and paying for the cost of the investigation. So that basically could bankrupt a number of small service providers. Michigan will prosecute any entity who, quote unquote, makes or causes to make an illegal robocalls, including voice service providers that accept calls into their networks. Okay, so you have to be really on your guard in Michigan. So this is extremely important, and just want to let you know that our firm is covering all these state laws. We're checking them out, and if you need any assistance with those, we can help you out as well. The FTC recently filed a complaint against a VoIP, alleging violation of their telecom sales rule because the VoIP failed to block illegal robocalls. There's substantial monetary sanctions at issue here, and it's a complete mess. Now Marriott, as many of you may know, last year filed a complaint against John Does at the time. They called them John Does, who made fraudulent calls and misused their name. Just last week, the FCC amended its complaint to list a lot of the robocallers, and they also named VoIPs as defendants in this case, alleging that they further the robocall scam by enabling the telemarketers to conduct their calls. Now, just briefly, in Marriott's case, a lot of the VoIP providers were allegedly in cahoots with the robocallers, but whether they were or not, it's in the complaint that they failed to mitigate the calls, and therefore they are liable. So if Marriott prevails, there's going to be federal precedent on this. So that makes it all the more important to be fully stir-shaken compliant by June 30th. And I just wanted to briefly mention that in some state laws, there are safe harbors that if you are fully stir-shaken compliant according to the FCC's rules, you're presumed to be exempt from these the laws. So in any event, that's it for me. And now I will turn it over to Michael to discuss the very important gateway order the FCC released last week.
All right. Well, thank you, Ron. I think as you probably gathered from that discussion, the days when voice providers were just viewed as common carriers that their only job was to pass traffic from one point to another, those days are long gone. And voice providers now have been effectively deputized as the front of the line robocall police. So you have to make sure that you're in compliance with these various obligations. And speaking of those, one of the major problems the FCC has in all of the U.S. authorities have in battling robocalls is that a significant portion of illegal robocalls originate overseas. And those providers or those callers and to some extent the providers that enable them often will spoof U.S. numbers in order to get consumers to answer the call. And of course, the FCC and the U.S. enforcement agencies have no jurisdiction over those foreign entities. So to try to address this problem, the FCC has targeted the U.S. gateway providers. These are the entities that really are sort of the first point of entry into the U.S. network for foreign originated calls. And the FCC, as I said on Friday, released an order that imposed a host of new obligations on U.S. gateway providers, and some of which have pretty direct effects on the foreign providers that are sending traffic. Before I get into sort of a high-level description of these things, the one thing to remember is all of these rules only apply when the foreign call is being sent to the U.S. with the U.S. number and caller ID. That's really what the FCC currently is most concerned about. Again, because when you add a U.S. number into the caller ID, you enhance your chances of the call being answered. So, what were the new obligations? The first that has the most direct effect, I think, on foreign providers is gateway providers are not going to be able to accept any traffic directly from an upstream foreign provider unless that provider has registered in the Robocall mitigation database, and that registration requirement includes filing a Robocall mitigation plan. So this is going to take effect probably sometime in the next 4 to 6 months. The deadline is a little unclear right now. But at that point, all foreign providers are going to have to be thinking about making sure that whoever they use to get traffic into the U.S. Has filed in the Robocall mitigation database, or that traffic is not going to get through. So that's the first requirement, and I think again the one that that foreign providers really need to pay attention to. The next requirement, and we just heard a lot about how stir, shake, and compliance works. Up to now, really it was just the originating providers that were supposed to implement stir, shaken, and sign calls, and then as a terminating provider, verify the stir, shaken information that comes through. But the FCC has decided that gateway providers too will now have to implement stir, shaken, and they are going to have to authenticate all unauthenticated calls that they receive that originate from foreign countries, and again, that use US numbers and the caller ID. Because stir shaken right now is really implemented most in the US and in Canada, we expect that most foreign calls are going to come into the US unauthenticated, and the gateway provider is going to have to attest to that call. And for those of you who know stir shaken, likely what that means is they'll be putting a C attestation on the call. So this requirement is going to not going to go into effect for about a year. They're going to give the gateway provider some time to gear up for this. But at some point, those calls that are coming in that aren't signed are going to have to be signed by the gateway provider. And I think, to kind of keep that in mind when Jim, after I finish here, starts talking about a global initiative to implement stir shaken, much better to have an incoming call already signed with possible an A-level attestation, so you can improve the chances of that call getting through. There's also going to be a requirement on the gateway providers to do a kind of a know your customer mitigation plan. And for the gateway providers, the customer is going to be their immediate upstream foreign provider. It's not necessarily going to be the call originator, because that entity may be several steps removed from the gateway provider. So I would expect that sometime soon, compliant gateway providers are going to be reaching out to foreign voice service providers or foreign intermediate providers that send traffic to the US. And they're going to have to sort of start working with them to make sure that those providers in turn are doing the right things to make sure that illegal traffic isn't coming through their networks, and that they're not using the gateway providers to send illegal robocall traffic onto the US networks. So the other thing is that all gateway providers will have to register themselves in the Robocall mitigation database. They'll have to talk about or describe the status of stir, shake, and implementation, and then submit a Robocall mitigation plan that includes their plan for satisfying the sort of know your upstream provider requirement and the general steps they're taking to mitigate traffic. And they will also have to affirm compliance with another new obligation, which is that they have to respond to a traceback request within 24 hours. So the final obligation I'll just sort of mention briefly is if the FCC or a law enforcement agency learns that there's illegal traffic that's been coming through, for example, by being informed by the traceback group, they may notify the gateway provider and say, look, carrier A is sending you illegal traffic. You have to block all of that carrier's traffic. And by the way, you also have to block all substantially similar traffic. We're not exactly sure what the contours of that will be. I hope that none of the providers here will ever get such a notification and have to address this issue, but the FCC sets forth a process by which gateway providers will have to submit a report to the FCC indicating that they in fact are going to block all of the identified bad traffic, and again, all substantially similar traffic. I will say that the Cloud Communications Alliance, along with Encompass, filed some sort of last-minute comments, and we were able to have a safe harbor attached to the requirement of blocking substantially similar traffic. So in the event that the gateway provider inadvertently blocks good traffic, they won't be subject to liability under the Communications Act. So I just wanted to give you kind of a high-level, quick summary and kind of a heads up that this has passed, and that over the next coming months, various of these obligations will start going into effect, and you'll have to start paying attention if you're a foreign provider about making sure your traffic gets to the gateway provider in good shape, and that if you need to be in the Robocall mitigation database, you need to get in there. With that, I'm gonna now turn it over to Jim, who is going to talk about a really interesting industry-led initiative to sort of take stir shaking around the world. So Jim, you're up next.
Hey, Michael Farrar, can I interrupt you one quick second? One chat message has just popped in. What do you advise if a carrier follows the regulatory steps for compliance, but is not prepared to assign tokens from a network perspective?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what that issue is. You know, if you're going to be stir shaken compliant, and you don't want to get your own, if, for example, you can't meet the requirements to get a token, there is an exception that if you can't, for example, get an OCN, or you're not for some reason a 499 filer, maybe you can get an exception that will excuse you from stir shaking implementation until you can come into compliance with the criteria. The other possibility, I think, as Ronald kind of went through, is you can use a wholesale provider to sign calls for you using their tokens. So there's some, you know, I'm not sure if that's completely responsive to that question, but that's a couple of thoughts I have on that.
Okay, yeah, that was Leathar. Did I explain that question properly, Leathar? Let's assume I did. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I think that was fine. I think, yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, we can.
Oh.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I was just saying, I think that's fine. Okay, so yeah, so I think that, you know, the first parts of it is it's very straightforward, but there could be a lot of network work to do. So it's good to know that we do have potentially an option to have a partner carrier assigning tokens. So, okay, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, and feel free to reach out to any of us if you have, you know, questions after the end of the webinar. We're all happy to talk with you.
Great. Yeah, and we will be sharing the slides and a recording of today's session later today.
Thank you.
Michael, thank you. Jim, sorry to interrupt you. Let me turn it back over to you, please.
No problem, Joe. Another question just came in on the gateway provider, so I don't know if you want to address that first.
Sure.
Yeah, I did. Thank you for that question. So what's a gateway provider? There is a specific definition, but essentially it's the first point of entry into the U.S. The gateway provider has to have U.S. facilities. So it's really the first facilities-based provider a foreign provider will hit when it comes into the U.S. And the gateway provider, by definition, is an intermediate provider. It's not going to be terminating that call to the call party. It's going to, in turn, hand that off to other intermediate providers, which will send it along to final termination. But the keys are it's US-based, and they have US-based facilities, and it's the landing point for foreign calls.
And Joe, some more questions are coming in. This is Jim. I suggest you keep taking them because mine is pretty short and it's kind of forward-looking. So
sure. Sure. I appreciate that. Yeah, Michael, you see the next one. Can you elaborate on the use of a wholesale carrier's token for compliance?
I can a little bit, and I think Ronald probably can as well. But there are wholesale providers that will offer the ability to sign calls for their retail customer carriers. And I think they're, Bandwidth and some others provide this service. It's actually something that the FCC has gotten interested in because it turned out that when they looked at the Robocall mitigation database, there were many, many more hundreds of carriers who said they'd implemented Stir Shaken than had tokens. So the FCC said, "What's up with that?" And the Cloud Communications Alliance and then Compass and some others went in and talked to the staff and said, "Well, what's going on with that is there are wholesale providers that have tokens and that will enter into agreements with other carriers, particularly if they're the provider that provides numbers, wholesale numbers to that carrier. They will sign those calls and give them either an A or B level attestation. The one thing I will caution about that when you look into this is some providers will provide this service so that you can sign outgoing calls, but they may not enable you to verify incoming calls with Stir Shaken information. And that's just as important in being in compliance with Stir Shaken as signing outgoing calls. So, if you engage in discussions with the wholesale provider, find out, are they going to provide you just originating signing services, or will they also help you in verifying incoming calls with Stir Shaken information?
Great.
Michael, can I just add something to that, if I may?
Please.
Absolutely.
There also are, I'm aware of at least a couple of companies that are offering basically signing as a service, where you don't have to set up the Stir Shaken framework. You just, via an API, you access a service that they offer, and that signing can be done actually with your certificate. But so you don't have to deploy equipment, you just access it and then pay a fee for every call that's signed. If there's interest, I can offline point you to two vendors that I'm aware of that offer that service, and that's another way that you can do it. And that can be done, by the way, both for signing and for verification.
Great. Good. Thank you for that. And Jay, Ron, too, if you need to add anything, feel free to mute yourself now. I should mute before, but that's okay.
I think you pretty much covered it.
Great. Thank you again, Ron, Michael. Thank you, Jim. Take it away.
Thank you, Joe. So I'll just kind of give you a brief insight into what's coming down the pike in terms of where this might go next. As we heard in earlier presentation today, there's a recognition that spam calls don't all originate within the U.S. Many of them, in fact, according to Traceback, over half of them actually originate outside of the U.S. And in fact, that's actually half the spam calls with U.S. caller ID actually originate outside of the U.S. So the problem clearly is global, and the FCC has recognized that, which is why they've come out with gateway requirements, which again is better than nothing. But the problem is that the way Stir Shaken works, you really get the best benefit when you create the signature at the originating service provider, not at the gateway, because the gateway generally doesn't have direct line of sight to the origination. So it may, if you only look within a single country, you cannot always connect the dots to really provide insight into the service provider. And there's a couple of ways you can deal with that. I mean, basically the linear way, the direct way, is just wait until other countries deploy Stir Shaken. Canada has already deployed Stir Shaken. France is in the process of deploying it, and many others are investigating it. But if you go to the next slide, there's a couple of problems with that approach. The first one is it's going to take a long time before every country deploys Stir Shaken. The second one is it's complex because, again, it's a separate presentation to dig into the details, But as you deploy STIR/SHAKEN in other countries, then the two countries need to basically agree that they're going to trust each other's signatures, basically the certificates that are issued in each country, that they're going to trust those, and that requires a negotiation process, which, if you do the math with nearly 200 countries in the world, would be a lot of bilateral negotiations for that to happen. And the other thing is that, of course, as every country independently deploys STIR/SHAKEN, you'll have subtle variations in STIR/SHAKEN no matter what, because many countries have unique requirements because of national laws or whatever. But if you do it in an uncoordinated way, you'll end up with a lot of just random variation that will make life complicated for anyone who's dealing with global traffic. And because of that, if you go to the next slide, ATIS and iConnective have basically are working together to launch a global STIR/SHAKEN framework. And again, what we mean by global in this context is that it is not associated with any given country. The STIGA in the US is associated with the US. There's a CSTGA in Canada that's associated with Canada. The French one will be associated with France. This is one that is like that, but it is not tied to any given country, and therefore it allows service providers who have business in other countries but want to get their calls signed end to end, they can get certificates through this process and sign those calls. I will note that I said they can get certificates. They can get those certificates after a suitable vetting to make sure that they're in fact legitimate providers and that they're only providing full attestation to calls that warrant that, obviously. The other thing I will note around that is ATIS is, as part of this industry-led initiative, ATIS is providing the governance authority function, but we're also working with a number of service providers who are basically providing what we're calling the oversight committee. So it's not ATIS making up the rules for who gets certificates and how you manage it, but in fact representatives of the industry who are doing that. And as part of that initiative, we're also beginning the process of working with CCA and with Joe to have you guys be part of setting that and testing that process as we move forward as well. So again, that's I think might make it interesting as something that's coming down the pike. So if you go next, this hasn't launched yet, but it's the intent is to launch later this year. The initial focus will be very much on calls that originate outside the US and are coming into the US, whether those be roaming US roamers or in fact legitimate call centers internationally that are legitimately using US numbers because they're making calls on behalf of US businesses. And so they again have a legitimate right to indicate a US caller ID, but also expanding that so that it would also allow signatures for calls that do not have US numbers. Now, that is not currently required by the FCC, but of course, as more and more calls have full attestation because of SHAKEN deployment in the US, calls that aren't signed will begin to look suspicious, and this will allow that traffic to get those full signatures. I say we're initially focusing on calls coming into the US, but if you go to the next slide, we're planning to very quickly, and very quickly might be almost immediately, move to supporting calls between other countries, so that in fact service providers outside of the US and Canada would have the ability to have their calls signed between any countries that they did business in, or between any service providers who were part of this global framework. If you go to the final slide, and again, this is just giving you a teaser of what's coming. You know, I'm happy to follow up with more details, and again, Joe and I are discussing this on a regular basis, but I'll just give you a hint of what's coming. So the purpose of this is to actually take the foundational principles that are behind SHAKEN and have been basically the basis for Shaken deployment in the U.S., but extend those to a broader global audience. But again, to make Shaken available globally in a way that is completely consistent with those principles, so that you do in fact maintain the trust that's essential for this to work. The real idea here is to support and accelerate the rollout of Shaken globally. And I guess the other thing is, this is not meant to in any way, shape, or form replace or compete with deployments at the national level, but instead to complement it, given that that there's fairly limited national deployment at this point. Yeah, and then basically as part of this and spreading the gospel, the word about Stir Shaken and the governance principles, we hope that we can have far more consistency as Shaken is deployed globally. And I know a number of our members that include bandwidth that was mentioned earlier, very much the reason that they're part of this and driving this is what they don't want to end up with is having to support 130 different flavors of Shaken globally, and to deal with that complexity, to have something that is as much as possible consistent as they deploy that. And that is, again, a flyby indication of what's coming, but hopefully that will help to make it more interesting. And through our working with you guys with CCA, you guys will be part of that. Joe, back to you.
Great. Thank you for that, Jim. Appreciate it. Questions? Any questions? Anybody at all? Feel free to chat them or turn on your camera and your microphone. I'll tell you one thing about Stir Shaken. I always, approach these kind of things from a standpoint of, who needs more regulations, who needs more government control. But the reality is that, these robocallers have taken over our phone systems. I tell people I never answer the phone at home anymore because it's always a robocall. So if we can claw our way back, I think we're going to add value to the services that you provide to customers. So I'm a fan of Stir Shaken. I want it to work. And secondly, as Jim said, we need, as an industry, need to get behind Stir Shaken on an international basis. The more we let the governments around the world control Stir Shaken, the more of a mess it's going to be. So if we as an industry can kind of lead the way, we can tell the government the right way to do it. Do have a question here from Celine. If I understand well, the foreign carrier will have to have the obligation to file a robocalling plan. How will this be reinforced? If they don't want, as a gateway provider, we cannot take their USA traffic. Is that right? Let me start with Jim. Jim, or go ahead, Michael.
No,
take it away.
That's Michael. Yeah, go for it, Michael.
Yeah, no, that's right. The U.S. gateway provider at one point in the future will not be able to accept traffic directly from any foreign provider that's not in the database. Again, that's with numbers, with the calls with U.S. numbers and the caller ID. But yeah, so you're going to get blocked if you're a foreign provider handing traffic directly off to a gateway and you're not in the Robocall mitigation database. Your call that gateway provider is required to block your calls. And with respect to the Robocall mitigation plan, the U.S. has been pretty flexible about what that has to include, but it's sort of commonsensically, steps that are effective and reasonable in making sure that you're not passing along illegal traffic. And
may I interject 1 second, Mike?
Yes, please.
Oh.
Yeah.
Just wanted to mention, I've filed numerous robocall mitigation plans, and what you want to do is take a look at the ITG's Practices and Procedure Manual and go to Appendix A, which is their best practices, and just follow the best practices and list them in your robocall mitigation plan, assuming that, of course, you have them. And a lot of those are things like, for example, monitoring calls, traffic patterns in calls, obviously not the calls themselves, having procedure block calls, responding to traceback requests, and know your customer, which is basically understand, at least as far as, we're not talking gateway here, but just the regular robocall mitigation plans. Know your customers, know their physical address, have a contact person, things like that. But it's all in the ITG practice procedure Annex A. So just take a look at that.
Hey, Ron, if you send us that link later, we'll share that. When we share the recording from today and the PowerPoint from today, we'll include that link in there to everybody.
Yeah,
Sure
my
thing.
point, sorry, it's Celine, I just want to compliment because my point is that we understand what is in the robocalling mitigation plan, but it's more how can you force the foreign carrier to do it, right? If we tell them you have to do it, but they say no, for which reason? Why would, FCC oblige us as a foreign carrier to file this robocalling mitigation plan? Is it just, will they be informed, or we have as a gateway provider to inform all foreign carriers that they have to do it if they want to send us US traffic?
So yeah, Michael,
that's right.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I mean, just that's exactly right. As I said, the FCC can't reach out and directly regulate the foreign provider, and it sort of says, I'm not really making you file in the robocall mitigation database. I'm just saying, hey, if you want to use U.S. numbers, you got to you got to file in the robocall mitigation database, or we're not going to accept your calls. That's that simple. And it's their way to try to indirectly reach foreign providers and get a handle on all the legal traffic that's coming in from foreign countries.
Okay, great. Ian has a couple more questions. Michael, take a look at there's a couple there from Ian and Peter.
Hang on a sec. Let me pull them up.
I can read it if you like.
I got it. Hang on a sec. It's those carriers who have to register. The entity that has to register is the direct upstream provider that's sending traffic to the U.S. gateway.
Yep.
That what the U.S. gateway is going to do is they're going to say, okay, I'm getting traffic directly from company ABC. Is ABC in the robocall mitigation database? They're not there. Sorry, company ABC, I can't take your calls. So it's not the originating provider usually. It's going to be the provider ultimately that hands the traffic directly off to the gateway.
So in this context, it would be Gamma or BT that would be handing off to the gateway, and therefore would be the ones that would have to register. Correct?
Correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Sorry, I thought you said the opposite. That's why I was just to be very clear.
But in this case, that the person highlighted on the UK case, Gamma and BT don't have to implement steer shaken solution, because if they are not the first point of equipment entry in the US.
That's correct. They don't have to implement stir shaken. It's the gateway provider that has to implement stir shaken. Right. They don't. That's correct.
And what is the expectation then if the gateway provider does not have any visibility on the subscriber who origin the traffic? In this case, you see it will be a carrier that owns the subscriber, end of the call to Gamma or BT, end of the call to a gateway provider, who end of the call to the US provider. So what's the expectation that the gateway provider will be able to give an attestation that is higher than C? It's impossible, right? And will this solve any problem that gateway provider only give attestation C?
Well, that is a great point, and frankly, the Cloud Communications Alliance and many others argued vociferously to the FCC that it makes no sense to require authentication when all you can do is give C attestations. But the FCC said, well, a C is better than nothing, we think. But the other part of actually the one part of it that is that the one of the aspects of attestation is you identify yourself as a point of entry. So if you're doing traceback and you're 4 or 5 hops down the road before the terminating carrier, and there's a C attestation that identifies the gateway provider, and it turns out to be bad traffic, then you can pretty quickly identify who to go to and complain. So that's one aspect of it. But you're absolutely right. There's no way that most gateway providers in most situations know anything about who made the call or even the originating provider.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
And
Everybody,
I just
go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead,
I just
Alex.
want to clarify one. Yeah, I just want to clarify one thing in terms of blocking foreign carriers. So, a foreign carrier that's not registered in the robocall mitigation base, the gateway provider will have an obligation not to block all of their traffic, but just the traffic that has a U.S. number in the caller ID field, right?
I think that's right, Ellen, because again, all of these rules just apply to calls with U.S. numbers. But you know, if there's a carrier that's sending you a mix, right, then that's an issue. If they've got some calls that have the U.S. number and some calls that don't, with respect, you know, they've got to be in the database. So unless, you know, then it's kind of up to you to try to figure out, right, which traffic is which.
Right.
But I
Right.
think
But
your systems can do that. Yeah.
yeah. If we have a system that can identify
Just,
real time,
oh,
then we could block
oh,
all the traffic that had
I'm
the A
sorry.
number.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Interject. You can find in 64 and 47 CFR 64.1200K lists the blocking rules for the FCC, and they technically, you know, regular voice service providers, they're not terminating carriers, can block calls that have issues with the numbers, the NANP numbers, the U.S. numbers. So just take a look at that section in the code. Again, it's 47 CFR 64.1200K, and that will sort of give you an indication of the current blocking rules. But the gateway order probably will, or I think it does have more. But for now, that's where you find blocking rules.
Yep. Great. Hey, Michael, prior June 30th, is a magic date? Is that my understanding?
For gateway providers to implement StarShake on June 30th, 2023 is the magic date. There are other magic dates for other of these rules.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the FCC decided to put a different deadline on each of its rules virtually. But you know, if anybody has questions about specific deadlines for parts of these rules, please feel free to reach out. But I think it's more information than people probably
Yeah,
want to
okay.
have at this point.
Yep. Okay.
Now,
Well, but thank you all.
Thank you. Oh, I just one final point. The gateway order also includes a notice of proposed rulemaking, and they have 17 points basically that the FCC is soliciting comments on, and all of those have to do with extending the stir-shaken requirements and other requirements to say, satellite providers, and basically strengthening stir-shaken. And not only that, but also whether extreme sanctions can be imposed on gateway providers and others. So just, I hate to put in a plug for the firm, but we just put out a client alert on that. It points out the points of the report and order and the notice of proposed rulemaking. So you might want to take a look at that. There's a link to the order itself there too. But please be very aware of the gateway order, and take a look also at what the FCC is soliciting comments on, because it's pretty, there's a wide dragnet there, and just be aware of it. Thanks.
John Robertson, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I have a question regarding the various deadlines and due dates and drop dead dates for all these enforcement actions. Is there a place where those are conveniently summarized?
Yeah, in our
Or
client
indexed?
alert. I can send it to you if you want.
would be much appreciated. Thank you.
And you know what we'll do? We'll include it in our summary to everybody today, if that's okay. If you send it to us, Ron, we'll make sure to include it. Okay.
That's
Yeah, I'll do
excellent.
that.
Thank you.
Just got it done.
Great, thanks. You see, Michael, I told you some people would be interested in the date.
Well, if I told you,
I
most
just
of them
have a-
depend.
Go ahead, Celine.
Yeah, I just have a last question. Maybe it's a tricky one, but if there's a wholesale carrier that is located in Europe, right, and they have their equipment, let's say, in a country in Europe, but then they carry this traffic through IP, right, to directly a US carrier, are they considered as a gateway, or because the equipment is located in Europe and goes directly to a US carrier, then they don't have this obligation for the robocalling mitigation plan? I understand, but for implementing steer shaken. So is it like, because I'm still struggling to understand what makes a carrier a gateway, you know, like you answer clearly at the beginning, it's where the equipment is located, the first entry point of the call where the equipment is located, right? But some carriers might have equipment in Europe, but they are acting as wholesale carrier and end up their traffic to the US provider. So then the gateway provider is more the US carrier that takes the traffic, and this wholesaler does not have the obligation.
So, Michael, just to rephrase a little bit. So, yeah. So, what makes a gateway, gateway carrier? Do you have to be a U.S. company with the equipment in the United States? I think that's what.
Yes, you have to be a U.S. company.
It's is it the entity, the equipment, the entry point of the call? I see nuance there, but maybe.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the nuance. I think there are many sort of European wholesale providers that aggregate traffic and then send to the U.S.
Yes.
Those entities are not the entities that the FCC is targeting for stir shake and implementation. Again, it's really all of those entities will eventually hand their traffic off to some U.S.-based facilities provider that will in turn send them off to other carriers for eventual termination. And it's the US-based, and typically they'll have a license, US-based, US licensed with US facilities. That's the gateway provider.
Okay.
Right, and also that's absolutely right. And I just got through reading the whole thing when I put together the client alert. So I'll just add that that they have to have point of presence in the U.S. So yeah, it has to be equipment and a point of presence in the U.S. As the first carrier to accept calls from overseas. That's your gateway provider. And if anybody, we all on the same page on that? Did I get anything wrong?
Yeah.
That's
okay.
right.
It's clear.
That's great. Okay. All right. I think we're John. Just to make sure. One last thing. Your hand's still up. You were answered your question, right?
Didn't mean to have it up still. Sorry.
Well, put your hand down. You're gonna get tired. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. I know we went a little bit long, but it's important. Not only is stir shaking happening today in the United States, it's going to happen in the future around the world. And that's our job as Cloud Communications Alliance, to make you aware of not only what's happening, but what's going to be happened, so that you are prepared. So thank you so much, our panelists today, for putting on a really great presentation. We appreciate it, and thank you all for your support and for being members of the Cloud Communications Alliance.